Hello and welcome to Being Crisis Prepared, the organisational resilience podcast from Ibroy Crisis Management. Today I'm joined by two people that we've worked with in the past, Dick Hewitt and Rob Wally. I'll let them introduce themselves in a second, but I'm really grateful for them taking the time to join us today because there is so much going on in an organisational resilience sense at the moment with COVID. What next? Build back better. The whole leadership piece. There are so many things to discuss. What we aren't going to do today is go into any political discussion about the rights and the wrongs, but just make observations of what do we learn and how can we take those learnings and employ those better in our own lives and our own organisations, because that's what the game is all about, is to learn from what we do so that we're better should it ever occur again. But by way of introduction, let me first ask Dick to introduce himself.
Hi, Matt. Thank you. Dick Hewitt here. I'm the founder and co-director of a small consultancy called Thrive. And really what we do is go into organizations and help them reconfigure their business model. Before I did this, I was 20 years in the military, culminating in command of a high readiness airborne unit. And then went on to do 5 years in local government, which mainly involved being Director of Transformation for a large local authority in the south of England.
Okay, so a diverse experience, background of having done it, and well as having spent many years coaching and supporting organisations to look at their processes and their structures. Great. Rob, can you introduce yourself to the listeners, please?
Thank you, Matthew. Rob Wally, founder of Controlled Events. We are a consultancy specialising in resilience, readiness, control and communications. And with COVID-19, a fair bit of our work on the event side has gone for the short term. So we're facing our own resilience challenges, which we're talking about a bit today. And on the resilience side, we support a range of public and private sector clients spanning construction, major events, transport, housing, local authorities in preparing their resilience plans or reviewing them at the moment, and preparing for a recovery as well.
Okay, thanks Rob, and thanks Dick, and obviously the benefit of Ibroy to all of this, you may listen to it and go, well, hang on a second, they're competitors. Not a bit of it. We are better by collaborating with the areas of specialisms that we know and we trust, and finding those key partners to be able to deliver excellence. And therefore, I'm delighted that two founders of successful businesses are able to join us today to have a discussion. By way of explanation of the next 20 minutes or perhaps a little bit longer, we're going to look at three topics, one for each of us, and then have a discussion around that for a few minutes and air some thoughts and observations. And the first one I'll take the opportunity to introduce is this whole issue at the moment in the UK of the Dominic Cummings affair and what do we learn from that. And clearly it is a crisis communications angle that I'm coming from. What is right and what is wrong about the law, etc., I'm not interested in. What I am interested in is what do we learn from that if it was our business that type of incident had happened and one of our colleagues had been in a situation where they were involved in a media storm or something had happened that was damaging the reputation of the business. Do you get on the front foot as quickly as you can and try and take ownership of the story? How do you do that, etc.? And I think from my perspective, you are never in a good position if you try to hide the story. Once it's out with social media, it is out. Get on the front foot, tell people what you know, establish what you don't know, what you're going to do about it, and try and create the story in the best possible light for your business and what you want to achieve. But always, always, always tell the truth, because you'll get caught out sooner or later. And I don't know whether perhaps Rob, you've heard similar examples of good case studies or bad case studies, or any thoughts on sort of crisis communications?
Yeah, well, I think the looking at case studies out there, and I was doing a bit of research recently, and you over various disasters, you hear more about the businesses that have got it wrong than you hear about the ones that have got it right. And I think the in the current climate where everyone's quite emotive and personally affected by the incident, integrity is absolutely king. And I remember my crisis comms sort of awareness training after being thrust in the limelight of a Sky News interview after a severe weather tornado in my borough. It was 2006. And after a pretty poor interview, I was given some crisis comms training afterwards, and so it could never happen again. And they talked about kind of relevant and timely updates, having trust and authority. And if you look at the government updates at the moment, I don't know about some of your listeners, but I'm now leaning more towards the digest of what the government are saying, not listening to it live, because I don't feel like I'm getting the answers that I'm looking for personally from the updates we're given. And I feel like we've been given a story rather than the actual facts. So without making any political comment, I think for any organisation, that integrity is really key, and it's amplified during a disruption, especially when that incident is personal. If people affected by the cyber attack and your EasyJet, for example, and their messaging, which has been pretty poorly handled, I would say, in terms of the incident may or may not have happened quite a while before they announced it. They were already affected as an organisation as the aviation sector, but really they haven't gone out and communicated well to their stakeholders. So I think that integrity and reading the mood of where you're at as an organisation and where your stakeholders are at is really important, and never more so than during COVID-19 at the moment.
Yeah, I think that your use of integrity is really important word there. Dick, have you come across any examples or got any thoughts on where we are at the moment?
I've got thoughts. I agree with what we're heading towards here when we're talking about this with regard to truth and integrity. And I don't want it to sound motherhood and apple pie, but there's a phrase out there that's about controlling the narrative, and I think what we've seen is a rather clumsy attempt to control a narrative that was not didn't hold much integrity in the first place. In our experience working with organisations, it's quite interesting. When we first get a project team on board, we call it the onboarding process. We are conscious of controlling the narrative in the way that we would understand it, and that would mean putting the truth out there. Here's what we're trying to do. Here's the group that we're forming and the intent behind forming that group and the intent of our actions as we go forward. And it's interesting if you're pursuing that narrative and just trying to make sure that the right information is going out there, all sorts of people will take different meanings from that information. So it's quite interesting to watch how differently people react to information. And we've had experiences in the past where we've been 6 months plus into a project and we've suddenly discovered there's a project board that's been established somewhere else that's looking at what we're doing, and we weren't aware of it. So it's always interesting to follow up on the information that you're putting out there and how people are receiving it and acting upon it, because it might not be the way that you've designed the information to impact on people.
And I think the observation, we ran an exercise yesterday for a client, and because everyone's working from home, it was all done through video conference, instant messaging, texts, emails, the lot, and the ability to communicate. And just because I've said it doesn't mean to say that the other person has heard it in the same way. And you're right that there are so many different platforms at the moment of communications. How do you ensure that your target audience, your stakeholders, actually respond in the way that you're doing it? Because you can't make a personal call to all of them. Depending on which bit of Twitter or the news you read depends on how that affects your judgment. So it is an incredibly difficult subject, and certainly not one that we're going to do justice to in 10 minutes. But I think for anyone that's listening, is just, perhaps as both Rob and Dick have said there, is just to reflect on who is the target audience, what method are you going to use to reach that target audience, who delivers it, how often, all those basic things that if you Google stakeholder management plan, you'll come up with a table that gives you that type of those headings. It's really easy, it's free, it's online, and therefore there should be no excuse for any business not to have some form of crisis comms plan, stakeholder engagement plan, whatever you wish to call it. How you use it is perhaps where the skill and experience comes in. But thinking about it sometimes is half the battle. Yeah, interesting conversation, and I'm sure Rob mentioned there EasyJet. There will be many other examples that people can look at of good practice. Some of it, the response to, I think it was TUI, managing director response to the terrorist attack on the beaches in, I'm going to say, Tunisia a couple of years ago, and he flew out and he met the people and escorted them back and so on to make sure that his key stakeholder group was his customers, and therefore did the right thing and was seen to do the right thing and worked really well. Thomas Cook had an incident where a child was sadly died in one of their properties. I think it was in Greece, and they refused to take ownership and responsibility for it. Well, guess what? They've since gone bust. Well, I'm not saying that child was directly responsible, but it's just an indicator of if you can't stand up and take ownership, you're on what the Scots would call a sugly peg, sticky wicket, whatever phrase you want to use. It undermines the ethos and culture of the company, in my opinion. Anyway, that's enough of my topic for the day. Vic, can I ask you about something that's caught your eye over the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, I think I'm always interested in hearing the buzz phrases that emerge during periods, and let's face it, there has been no greater strategic shock to the planet than the one we're going through now in terms of the pandemic and the response that's being that we're still in the midst of. And I'm hearing a couple of buzz phrases that are coming up already that are related to, where do we emerge from this in terms of coming out of the lockdowns, starting to get lives back and economies back on track. So there's a couple of phrases that I'm hearing. One of them is build back better. Another is the ability to bounce beyond the recovery and really, supercharge your recovery period. But I'm interested in what we understand these phrases to mean. From a Thrive perspective, when we go into an organization, we think about a number of things and how they're all working together and how they're interrelating to each other. We think about workflows, we think about patterns, we think about processes, and we think about people. And if I think about those four kind of elements, already as a result of what's happened during lockdown, there has been a whole system change, but it might be barely perceptible to the people who are in the middle of it, or almost unnoticed, because lockdown has shifted behaviours dramatically. Lockdown has shifted the way that we're trying to get our businesses back on track. They have certainly shifted how we're doing business, and that, we've all got personal first-hand experience of that. And new workflows, patterns and processes and relationships between people are emerging. So I wonder if people in organizations are stepping back to think about the whole picture and the whole system change that's going on. In terms of workflows, I'm talking about how tasks and activities are flowing between people. How differently are we organizing ourselves at the minute? That's certainly happening because most of what we're doing is happening online. I realize there's some recovery of old practices, let's call them, happening now, but it'll take a long time before it gets to what we were used to in the past. So we're going to have to organise ourselves differently going into the future. And what's that doing to... Go ahead, Matt.
So I was just wondering, is this sort of part of the idea of we often talk about lessons identified, sometimes used as lessons learned, and all too often we have an incident and then we sort of dust ourselves down and then we go, great, and you never have time to actually embed the teaching that the incident has provided so that you close out that risk for the next time round. And we sort of looking here at how do we actually take the lessons and make sure that everything, our processes, our ways of working, are aligned to the new thinking? And is that what we're looking at here under Build Back Better?
That's definitely part of it. But
Okay.
if I remember my experiences when we were trying to identify lessons, especially from my military experience, I was usually involved in the middle of something very fast-moving and quite confusing. After that happened, when you had the ability to step back, as I said, and look at the whole picture, you were able to see why you made certain decisions at certain times, but it might not have been the way you'd have made it if you'd been able to see the whole picture. So my sentiment here is about being able to realize that the whole picture is changing and not respond to the signals that are immediately around you, because there's deeper stuff going on here. I mentioned workflows and I mentioned processes. They're certainly changing, but the patterns behind them are also changing. So the normal, well, not normal, but the power dynamics that we had been used to in the past are changing as well. So that's going to, those are the bigger picture those are the bigger picture items that I'm referring to here. And that's going to change the relationships between people. And we like to think of organizations as nothing more than a network of relationships between people. Yes, you can put bricks and mortar around it. Yes, you can put nice cars in it if you want. There's all sorts of things that you can hang on an organization. And many chief executives will show you an organizational diagram and say, that's my organization. Well, for us, it's not. The organization is the pattern of relationships between the people in that organization and the power dynamics that sit behind it. So those are the bigger picture items that I'm thinking of and how they have been shifted by the recent turbulence.
Okay, no, thanks for that. Rob, yeah, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think the lessons identified piece is a really important one. And traditionally, organisations are very much sort of, let's have a set piece, lessons identified process or debrief meeting at the end of the incident. And what I'm finding is it's, for some organisations, they're very ready culturally to debrief now, what worked well, what didn't. Let's not plan and almost base our resilience assessment on how well or badly the last couple of months have gone. Actually, what we've got to do is look forward to what the challenges that could come up with the consequences of COVID-19 in the background. And I certainly think people, a number of clients I've spoken to have said, well, let's debrief at the end of this. Well, when is the end of this? And actually, can we afford to wait till a number of months and months on from now to do that debrief? Or for some, actually, are we missing a trick with some of the immediate lessons which could prevent any future consequences of COVID or other incidents during the COVID environment causing more of an impact?
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Dick. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, to say, yeah.
I think there was always a great expression that I've carried forward from my past experiences into the work I do now, and it's the expression called ground truth. It's what actually happens to make events unfold the way they unfold. And when I refer to the organisation being a network of relationships between people, that's what determines how things really get done. And I think there are big implications for areas like resilience in this, in that how things are actually getting done is different now. How people are working together in a constant process of negotiation and renegotiation around tasks and activities, workflows and processes, that has changed. And many organizations have very specific instructions and checklists on how things should happen, but how they really happen is between the people that do them. And I'm seeing the ground being shifted beneath people in how they get things done. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a dramatic thing or a bad thing. There are many, many opportunities to be taken here. There are many opportunities to look at the way our workflows, our patterns, our processes, and our people are behaving in organizations and say, actually, that's a much better way of doing this. And we are having a much better impact on what we want to achieve. So my interest in the COVID response piece is, how do we lift the stuff that's good and shift it out the other end? And that's what I understand to be build back better or bounce beyond. Let's break the connection with crisis response and just say, hey, we've got a different way of working here. We've got a new pattern. Let's lift it and get it out there and start doing it, as not part of a response, but part of our way of working.
Yeah, and get the whole organization following that new way of working, as opposed to half of them on the new way and they've embraced it and are doing it every day, and the other half still that sort of elastic band on them being pulled back to the old way, because, well, I quite like that. I like 3-hour meetings sat around a board table as opposed to a Zoom. Either is equally okay. It just needs to be consistent. Yeah. Interesting thoughts, Dick. Have you got anything there just to finish off with on that topic?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think you raised the little shadow at the end there of snapback, and in terms of systems change and the work that we do, snapback will always be in the room. It'll be right behind you, and a lot of people will want to go back to an old way of doing something just because they felt more comfortable doing it that way, and it might not be the best way. So, yes, there is a tension to be held when you're doing this work, but I enjoy holding that tension, or I wouldn't do it.
Yeah. No, and I think all of us will recognise that the member of our team that has become an expert at doing something in a certain way, and when you now say, well, actually, I don't want you to do it that way anymore, we're now going to do it slightly differently, the danger of feeling underappreciated or no longer quite so important in the team is that whole human dynamic, and that doing it in the right way so that you take people with you, as opposed to, sorry everyone, I'm in charge, doing it my way now. That's not how we all work, and you want to take people on that journey, not leave them at the train station. God, what a terrible analogy. My apologies, but Dick, thank you for your observations there on two good phrases: build back better and bounce beyond, which from a resilience point of view is exactly what we should be looking at, and how do we get our companies to, another phrase that I found the other day, survive and thrive, obviously links in very well with your company, Dick, called Thrive. That's what it's about. It's not just about survive. It's how do we do things better so that we are stronger and our businesses are better in the future. And better, I appreciate, for some of us is pounds, shillings and pence. Others is quality of life. Others is community based. But the bottom line, whatever it is that we do as our output, our product, our service, our capability, if we can do it better, why on earth wouldn't we? So thanks for those observations. Really useful. Rob, I appreciate we had a quick conversation before coming on the call, and you were looking at the idea of what else. Did you have a few thoughts that you wish to share with the listeners? Certainly.
So I think coming into COVID-19, and I take the kind of personal experience of me as a business owner, we sort of knew it as a horizon scan issue, that was tracked back to kind of end of last year, early January. It was there on the horizon. COVID-19 was going to mean something to us, and obviously it was a top 4 risk that a flu pandemic was going to affect the UK. It'd been on the National Risk Register for a number of years, and as a business, I was kind of looking at, well, how do we support the people close to us, but also how do we prepare ourselves? And actually, you sort of find yourself wanting, when you look back and go, everything we preach about kind of horizon scanning and forward planning and worst case scenarios, the events were unfolding pretty quickly, and there's a lot of noise of all of the different information sources and differing views about what might impact us. And actually, from a personal point of view, the concurrency that our clients must face when they have a disruption of market change, financial impact extremely quickly, HR challenges, these are things that you try and exercise and you try and implement measures in a plan that help, but actually you have to call on your own training and your own sort of experience when a disruption hits, and navigate your way through it. And before this call, looking at some of the incidents that have happened in the last few weeks in areas where our clients work, large warehouse fire in Barking in London, chemical accident in Italy, flash flooding in another part of Italy, earthquakes in several places around the world, cyber attacks, we mentioned EasyJet, but also universities associated with COVID-19 research. All of these concurrent risks are happening, and the malicious threats of terrorism and other themes haven't gone away either. You think of our socially distanced queues that are going around the block when the shops reopen soon. That's a crowded place. We're going to have people back out there, and some of the risks that we may not have had front and centre are going to re-emerge. So I think more than ever, the kind of concurrency of different risks affecting us and the compound nature of them all affecting us on top of the background of, don't know about you, but pretty exhausted by COVID-19 so far. And I haven't been personally affected by it, but as a business, this has been a challenging time. We're all under a level of stress and pressure before something else happens. And I think that will really test the plans we have, but also our networks. And going back to what Dick said about your organisational structure, it will really test the DNA of an organisation as to will the culture, will the values, will the approach that staff and managers take sustain them through the next disruptions that hit while they're still recovering from COVID.
I think there's so many different issues in that a couple of minutes from you there, Rob, that it's a brilliant introduction to proper resilience, and is it culture and ethos, and how do you create that ability to take another hit, and at what point is it the straw that breaks the camel's back? And it can be something quite minor, but when you're at rock bottom in your resilience already because it's been chipped away at, it only takes perhaps something that you'd have no control over, something that impacts on your share price, or something that changes the exchange rate that you use, and suddenly your products aren't selling for what they were, entirely out of your control, but it hits you as a business. And I think quite often we look at one emergency may not be catastrophic. 2, 3 emergencies at the same time is the bit that you go, hang on a second, I'm on my knees here, don't hit me again. There's so many analogies there, isn't there, that the Swiss cheese model from a health and safety perspective type idea. And I think I read you talking about cyber attacks and incidents, that part of the national grid or a sub company experienced a cyber attack last week. And it is that, blimey, when we're scraping the bottom already on how do we keep things going, it won't take much. But I was also, Rob, I don't know whether you have any thoughts on part of business continuity. They look at disruption or loss of people, loss of premises or facilities, loss of supply chain. And in the past, we've quite often talked about loss of technology, but I think the proper heading is loss of resource. And something that I have shied away from is cash. Very seldom do we talk to a company about, what's your cash reserves like if you cease trading or bad debtors for a period, how long could you continue trading with your current bank account? And I think the whole sort of furlough scheme has introduced that idea of even with furlough, 8.4, I think it is currently, million people in the UK, salary is largely or in full paid by the government. And yet still companies are going into administration because of all the other costs, etc. So presumably their bank balance was almost nil. Well, all the banks have to demonstrate resilience to the Bank of England on the back of the 2008 crash. So, again, as jumping into Dick's piece of build back better, is that something that if I'm getting a service from a supplier, I don't necessarily ask them for their bank account, but it's that sort of, reassure me, are you resilient? Means, is your bank balance going to be able to keep you going for 3 months if you have a bad debt? So there's so much there about what next and how resilient are we on the back of this. Dick, did you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, as Rob was talking about the horizon scanning piece, another one of the buzz phrases appeared in my mind as, lots of people will be describing what they're facing as their perfect storm. And I think that speaks to Rob's concurrency of challenges. But I totally agree with that, but I'd also go into the area of complexity, because what's happening to people in organizations, in any form of organization or partnership, facing the challenges that we've got with the pandemic, it's become complex where it was maybe just complicated for them, because things are breaking down, organizational cultures are breaking down and shifting, and the way that we try and mend organizations or reconfigure them will be complex. And how do we navigate that? How do we start to cut through that complexity? I know that one of the approaches that we would take would be one of componency. So what's happening in the physical environment to people, what's happening in the moral and ethical environment for them, and crucially, what's happening in the cultural component. So it's the stuff that's not written down in organizations. It's the stuff that you hear in conversations beside the water cooler, which is the classic description of it. All of these things are going to be affected, and when you put them back together again, you're going to get unintended consequences, and therefore defining the complexity that we're facing. So I think, again, it's a question of how do organizations and people find the time and the space to step back from what's happening and be able to really think about the entire raft of effects that they're going to go through.
Yeah. Rob, what do you think?
Well, my military experience extended to the Combined Cadet Force at Berkhamsted for several years when I was younger, so I won't misuse a phrase you guys would know better, but fight and last war, I think, is a phrase which I'm certainly a number of clients now are sort of, on the one hand, really keen to develop their resilience because they get it. This was a near miss for them. This or has caused them to go to the brink. For others, there's almost this false sense of, well, we all work from home. Our IT didn't go down. We don't need an office so much. So actually, office arrangements, work area recovery, all these things are now sort of up for grabs. And actually, I think there could be sort of almost this Marmite approach. So some people are going to love resilience and want to invest time and effort in it. And others maybe just the penny hasn't dropped until maybe, I don't know, they've got a major AGM, shareholders are on the line for it, and your home Wi-Fi goes down and your senior person can't be on that call. Now, that's a small example, but actually the resilience at the sort of the personal level within your organisation, if we're going to work in this dispersed way, does become quite important. So I think the kind of concurrency of other risks happening is something that I think is a really key one for clients now, because there's a real risk that we look backwards and judge our resilience based on the risk we're experiencing now, rather than thinking actually what next.
Yeah, and you can see that in the past, for the last 4 or 5 years, probably cyber has been the hot topic in resilience, and are we able to withstand a cyber attack? And very little was done on any other type of incident. So the people issues, etc., were overlooked. But your point about technology, I think it was, again, last week, one of the government briefings was delayed because of Zoom going down. Well, right, that's interesting. But if the government has that problem with all the resources that they've got to their fingertips, what are we going to do as small businesses, as you say, when it's that AGM or that critical moment that you're about to do your presentation that you've spent weeks preparing, your pitch for investment, whatever it might be, and the technology goes down? You only get one chance to make a first impression. So valid points. Yeah. Sorry, Rob, go on. Yeah.
And I think there's a very different nature to the environment we're in at the moment, where we're all in it together. We're forgiving to an extent. News on the current government situation maybe aside, because we're all in it together. We're all getting affected to some extent by the consequences of COVID. So there's that forgiving nature of it. Whereas I think if it was an incident affecting us as a singular organisation, and we're, I don't know, sending staff to work from home and they're handling sensitive data, sensitive information from their living room, in ordinary terms, there were very good reasons why we didn't do that kind of thing. I'm not saying that we will have to go back to a completely different way of working, but our appreciation of risk and the cost benefit of the ways we work, I think will be changed by COVID. But the fact that your customers, your peers, your competitors are all affected at the same time does mean to an extent that the lens and the focus isn't on, are you delivering the same customer service as normal? That pressure isn't so much there yet because everyone's affected in a fairly uniform way.
Great point. Dick, did you have anything there that you wish to say, or has Rob covered it?
No. Yes, it was just an observation that sprung to mind as Rob was speaking there. It was that, what is our unifying purpose here? I'm trying to step back from this conversation, and you guys are very much involved in the resilient field. I would say that my involvement would come after that in terms of how do you build back better, dare I say it. But I'm trying to think of, the unifying purpose that's behind this for me is, and again, it's to coin the phrase, never waste a good crisis. How do we support people and organisations to identify the good stuff that's happening right now? And then how do we support people and organisations to lift that good stuff up and shift it into the future so as it's there and they can get back to doing things that they want to do in the ways that they want to do them. So it's been very useful to be able to talk about it.
Yeah, no, in which case I think that's probably a good time to draw stumps, call an end to this podcast. Really grateful to both our contributors, to Rob and to Dick, for their time and their knowledge. Both of you gave your company details at the start there, but Rob is the founder of Controlled Events, and Dick is the founder of Thrive HQ. If you're interested in following up what they do anymore, please do Google search them. You'll find their details, and they'll be delighted to chat through any of their issues with you if appropriate. But if you've enjoyed the podcast, please tell your friends, and we look forward to hearing from you, being with you next month. Thanks very much.